It is the first Q&A and group coaching of fulfilling our 2022 goals and being purposeful about loving what we do again, because we get to lead how we get to be on purpose about leading ourselves. We get to truly analyze and prove in our evidence, which is ironic of what we're going to be talking about today, so that we walk the talk and we truly get to love what we do again, or love it even greater. And this week, ironically, we have two attorneys in the room. Now, one of the attorneys is growing a whole new company, so it's a lot of fun to have him in the room. And Miss Richard Hall in Auburn, California, and Sam in Los Osos, am I saying that right? In Morro Bay area?
Los Osos, Morro Bay, San Luis Obispo area, yeah.
And that's one I got. San Luis Obispo I got. Okay. And you'd think I've traveled enough area to get them all down now, right? Yet educate me, Sam and Richard and Ms. Haley. When I say billable hours, what comes up for you? We'll start with Richard.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think billable hours are both the bane of attorneys and really not a good thing for clients either. In fact, I started a company years ago to try and eliminate billable hours, to go to task-based billing. Even wrote an article that was published in the Academic on that topic. And it started to get some actual footing. And then the .com collapse came along and that didn't happen. So in my mind, the challenge with billable hours is twofold. From the client's perspective, it's vague, it's ambiguous, it gets lost in detail and not the objective of the client. And from the attorney's point of view, it's honestly, most attorneys underbill because they forget the stuff they did because they're so busy trying to get the stuff done. So it's not a good approach overall. And I don't know if you know this, a little historical tidbit, the billable hours, the creation of the insurance industry. It used to be that when carriers hired attorneys, the attorney would work on the matter to the very end. And then it would send a bill and say, okay, here's what it cost based on what is the value that we delivered. And insurance companies decided they needed a better way to manage their expense. So by gosh, let's have those attorneys keep track of every minute of every day. Once they did that, then the billable hour became ingrained in the legal profession and is still there, even though doesn't make a lot of sense. As you know, April, most of the work that I do is actually flat fee. The company I had started before, which was called LexTech, was about building a database of the costs of law firms to do certain groups of tasks as a basis for moving to flat fee for a variety of things. And it was modeled after the construction industry, which I don't know if you know, in World War II, at the end of World War II, if you wanted to build a skyscraper in Manhattan, you got a time and materials estimate, right? But ever since then, they've been collecting data. So today, if you want to build a skyscraper, you're going to get a very specific cost estimate based on historical data. And the pricing for that sort of thing, just as an example, if you wanted to add an electrical outlet in a particular room, it's not just the price for the outlet, it's everything potentially related to that, whether it's an engineering cost, a material cost, a labor cost, whatever, anything related to that is built into that price because there's a bunch of data to support it. Legal industry doesn't have that. That was my intention to create that, but didn't get there. Anyway, long answer to a short question, but there's a lot about the billable hour.
Richard, I always love your answers, and I know you personally, so I know the depth of work and effort you go in, and it's going to be so much fun to go through what we're going to go through and then get your feedback afterwards. So I'm really excited about that. And I know you have a depth of wisdom and experience. What about you, Sam? What do you want to add to that of your own personal opinion and experience?
Well, I think my initial reaction is despair, depression, sadness. I think that, from my own perspective, keeping track of my time on a 5 or 10 minute basis or whatever the case is very obnoxious, time consuming. It is something that attorneys forget about. And also, I think that rather than focusing on the task or the value that I was giving the clients for a specific thing that they hired me for, I was doing estate plan, so a trust or a power of attorney, whatever. Rather than building upon the value of that to them, you would be looking at, well, how do I fill that hour? How do I fill that time? Which I don't think that just was a good way to transact business. I never billed hourly base or hourly work for my estate plan. I did all flat fee, just because I liked knowing exactly, the clients like knowing exactly how much it was going to cost them. And I liked knowing exactly how much I was getting in return for that, so that there was no confusion or question about that. And I think that, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't go to big law or corporate law or anything like that, was just because I didn't want to have to hit those artificial marks, because that was the only way that a lot of those law firms are making money. They're not making money, based upon how well you're doing something necessarily, like I could be as a solo, attorney. They're looking at the hours at the end of the year. So.
Well, and Sam, you run a new business now, and you are building a presence and having some structure. And how would you feel about the billable hours in your new business?
I still, maybe if you want to get something as granular as, hey, that task may take me an hour, so I will bill you approximately what that, what an hour is worth to me. But I'm not going to take a project on and say, I'm just going to bill you per hour on that project, because we get back having to keep track of my time and whether or not things involved in that task really took that amount of time, or they didn't, or that's fair to the client, or it's not fair to the client, or it's not fair to me. I'd much prefer to just say, hey, this is, the entire project cost. This is the value that I think that is fair for both of us, and go from there.
Yeah, I agree with that, because the problem with the billable hours, it puts the focus on really making the money as opposed to delivering the value to the client. And I have worked in big firms, and they have billable hour requirements. And so people tend to make work in order to meet those requirements. And the requirements can be reasonable, and they can be absolutely egregious. In one case, I know the firm had a 2,400 hour a year billable requirement, which is nonsensical because you can't meet it. And unless you're I'll put it directly, cheating, right? I mean, you just can't do it. Or unless you actually, set up camp, have a cot here in the office, and that's all you ever do with your life, right? It's not possible. So the focus is wrong. And when the profit model or the revenue model of the firm is built around that, that's a problem.
So I love the fact that we have powerful individuals in the room that are willing to tell us their true and opinions and perspectives. And I'm curious, Ms. Haley, what do you want to add to that before I go and upset the apple cart?
I'm looking forward to that. I just have such a different perspective of it, because that kind of the defining element of billable hours for an attorney is not there, I guess, for someone like me. And Sam, I think you're kind of going to start seeing the flip side of that coin, as you move more into marketing, because it's just set up, I think, a little bit differently. And I think like the article that we're going to go through kind of reflects that. So I think it'd be best for us to start going through that, because that's more of like what I think of is just tracking, what's directly being applied to the client versus what's more helpful for you as a business owner,
So the fun part, and so this is the joy of getting to know perspectives and people. So Haley and I have two very aligned minds, and yet when we start on something, it always has two different perspectives. So the fun part is I do a video this morning that is all about billable hours and the concept for Possibility Monday. The question is what, and I rephrase it a couple different ways. And basically, how are you being purposeful about your billable hours? Now, the billable hours was not based in an attorney mindset. It was based in the mindset of at the end of the day, Sam, if I'm tracking 5 to 10 minutes, is what I'm doing at this moment moving me forward to the completion I want to create. And
Which is ultimately profit.
ultimately profit in a business perspective. Yet I also mentioned in the video, whether it be spiritual, whether it be health. I mean, Richard, you are amazing at being purposeful, and you physically show the difference that you have invested in your billable hours towards being purposeful about completing your goals for your health commitments. If you looked at it health from that billable perspective, and then we'll go into the article, Richard, would you have a different perspective?
Yes, for sure.
And so,
Because it's not about the hour, it's about the value that's delivered in health.
exactly. So we're going to walk through a couple articles or a couple perspectives of one article that we shared in the email to tell everybody about this event, this opportunity to join us today. So Haley's got them up on the screen. So Haley, this as actually came in the Freshbooks click from the original article. And do you have that one up as well, or just this one? Perfect.
This one right here, yeah.
Okay, so this is a time tracking tool that actually shared this article that we sent out today. And so the understanding, and ironically having attorneys in the room or experienced attorneys, billable versus non-billable, all the things you talked about in regards to staying profitable or not staying, and what is the difference, right? So as you walk your way through this article in the short version, and this is what I love about Haley, is that she said, okay, I hear your high level concept. What's the execution phase, and how do we help people understand what that looks like? And that's where this article came from. So example of, and 1 second before we go to the Freshbooks one, Haley, a couple of the lists that they gave from the article on this Freshbooks is what does it look like to do non-billable tasks based off of a business perspective. Go ahead and hit the Freshbooks one.
So can I comment?
Please.
Just the one thing that certainly is a challenge from an attorney perspective, and I think from other perspectives that you need to work around in terms of a definition, is sometimes the most important work I do for a client happens in the shower, or happens when I'm driving the car, or happens whatever. It's because I'm thinking about their issue and how to get them the best possible resolution. And it's hard to say in your bill, oh, I was thinking about your work in the shower, or something like that, right? And so you need to have some sort of standardization about the tasks that are performed, even on a billable hour basis, and say this is an analysis task, regardless of when and where it occurred. But again, in terms of value delivered to the client, the most important work I do frequently isn't sitting at the desk, it's somewhere else.
I can resonate with that more than you know, because more often than not in my windshield time is when I've got every client running through my head and contemplating what and where and how things connect, et cetera. That's why I get lots of windshield time, as everybody knows. And so I get that at many different aspects. But in here, FreshBooks is a accounting tool. And they basically share the same thing Richard's talking about, is what is my billable time? How can I tell how? And you can either do it through a time tracking tool, an accountability tool. And Richard, if you allow me to share, I mean, your spreadsheet for your new client hours, would that be a great aspect of that?
Say it again, please.
So one of the tools that you're incorporating into your business is paying attention to the time invested into new clients.
Yes, and I'm actually capturing that through my client management service, Clio, which has been a huge advantage for me.
Never mind all the depth of work you are doing to be a very valuable consultant in your industry to help people uncover all the things you've learned the hard way through your business, right?
Right.
And the systems and structures and amazing amount of research and process you've done to develop things, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So the exciting thing is that this is just an example of of people that don't know billable hours, and the way you know it is to understand there are tools and processes in all different aspects of your definition of what is your billable hours, what is your time for completion, what is the strategy to break it down. Our coaches ask us, we ask you, about the opportunity of paying attention, how purposeful are we being in our billable hours, and defining what does constitute billable and non-billable hours.
Right, and there's a correlation, obviously, between time and result. Not 100% correlation, because sometimes your brilliant insight happens in a nanosecond, right? So even on flat fee billing, and I'm sure Sam has experienced this too, you even said this, Sam, is you look at, well, how much time do I expect it to take me to deliver this particular product or service? And so even if the time isn't specifically billable, it still has a value. And you're trying to determine the value that you've delivered to the client. And value is expressed at least two ways. One is, what did it cost you to deliver that, which is what billable hours are traditionally about, versus what is the benefit that the client got, which is completely amorphous, as it will. That's much harder to define. But if you work with your client on the basis of value, then you can agree on a value that's being delivered.
Well, a couple of things you all said, and then Haley, I'll let you pinpoint anything you want to specify about this as well, is that you both spoke about what is fair, what's value, and then you went on to about cost and benefit. If you're thinking of your health perspective, the cost and the benefit was the ultimate result, right? It was the commitment of time, the commitment of habits, the commitments of choices that ultimately created results. And
Right.
so, and Sam, your decision to move into a new industry had the same commitment of there is going to be a cost, but there's also a benefit, and there's going to be a ultimate result from that commitment. So are you all starting to see where we're going with the billable hours? And Sam, you have an interesting processing happening there. You're muted. So in case you have a thought.
Well, I think that when I was, this is just really a quick tangent, but when I was quoting bill, when I was quoting a flat fee, it normally would be, well, my time is worth approximately whatever the case is. If I worked on an hour and I think it's going to take 7 or 8 hours, that's kind of the ballpark that I would be in for the flat fee. But if I was going to bill based upon the actual value, it's much harder to kind of come up, but I think that would end up being a lot higher in some cases, the value of the client.
Well,
Specifically with the marketing thing I'm doing, it's much easier to make that business mathematical argument. Hey, this is an investment. This is going to make you so much, so much of a return, rather than saying, hey, this is going to take me X amount of time. So I'm billing based upon that.
And I love the different perspectives, because it depending on how you're approaching the client, and Richard, going back to the cost. So one of the things one of my coaches used to say, well, how much did it cost you to get this certification, this degree, this process? Immediately I thought of this silly little joke, and I'm sure you've all heard it differently, about the individual that walks into his buddy in the attorney's office and said, I need help with this. He turns around, pulls a book out, gives a lot and information, and then he says, I'll send you a bill. And he sends him a bill for, I don't know, $1 million or $1,000, whichever you choose. And the guy comes back to him and says, that took you a second to do that, or a minute, or whatever. And it also cost me that much money to know exactly where it was to give it to you. And therefore they got the invoice. So everybody gets the point, right? Is we all have an immense amount of cost that we put into things, but doesn't always mean the client has that same value to the cost we put in.
No, in fact, the client's perspective is expressed in another joke, as it were, which says this attorney died prematurely at age 35, and and amazingly, he goes to heaven, and St. Peter greets him at the pearly gates and said, oh, so you're 90 years old. He said, no, I'm only 35. He said, well, according to your billable hours, you're 90 years old.
I appreciate that one. Thank you. That is perfect.
But
So
to me, it's a balancing act. On the one hand, you've got what is the cost to deliver the service, and what, on the other hand, what is the value to the client? And the value to the client wants certainty in what the cost is.
Mhm.
And so to give them certainty, you give a flat fee, but the provider wants certainty also. And that's why they tend to go to time and materials, or in this case, hourly billing, because they know they're going to get paid for that. So there's a risk in there. And what happens is somewhere along the line, you have to accommodate that risk. And so people who quote flat fees, and I don't care whether it's car repair or legal work or anything else, tend to put a risk factor in the price because they don't know what they're going to encounter. And I certainly, you know, for instance, if you're trying to do litigation, it would be almost impossible to quote a flat fee because you just can't predict what's going to happen. But within the context of estate planning and bankruptcy or tax resolution, I have the ability to guesstimate or estimate what the variable could be and where I might have to put more effort in or where I might have less effort. So it's the who's absorbing the risk and how are you quantifying the risk? To me, that's the whole difference between flat fee and billable hour, is where does the risk land?
I love that awareness, sir, and the way that you presented it. Thank you for that. And it'll actually line up with where I'm going to go with it next. But Haley, anything else you want to share about the things that we have on the screen?
No, not yet. Maybe in a little bit. I'm really enjoying the different perspective that we're getting from these two attorneys that we have, because I think the conversation that you and I were having was so much more, okay, in a small business, how much time is spent directly, you know, benefiting the client versus how much time you need for yourself to just, you know, get yourself to be able to like be with the client, or does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I'm very much enjoying this new perspective.
But you know what you say, Haley, is exactly part of the issue. And that is when you're taking that time to organize the papers on your desk, that contributes to the value that you're providing. If you didn't do that, you couldn't provide that
Right.
value. And so, you know, the question is, you know, what is billable time on this? And some billable time is completely obvious. Obviously, I'm working on the client's project right now. But what about when I'm doing other things that are related to administrative stuff? I mean, the business that I had before LexTech, one of the things we did is review legal bills for corporations and government entities. And I can't tell you how many times I saw somebody say they were putting in billing for creating their billing.
Oh, wow.
The billing is part of the overhead of the hourly rate. So another perspective on that is when you build your hourly rate, it's not just for the value of your time per se, it's the value of all the other stuff that goes with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to do some administrative stuff, you got to do some financial stuff, you got to do whatever. The value of those services is built into that hourly rate, theoretically. So again, the challenge is billing for things that you should legitimately be billing for, but not billing for those things which are already built into the hourly rate. And in law, we have the model rules of professional conduct, which are sort of the guideline in that area, not universally adopted, but adopted here in California for sure. So again, just illustrating there's that balance. When you look at billable hours, those are things you need to consider. What's already in your hourly rate, and then what's different from your hourly rate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Richard and Haley, I mean, each of these are clickable links. And so, I mean, we'll send out the articles and details and specific. And as you go down, they have different aspects of visuals of what is the billable, what's it according to Freshbooks, not according to our definitions and or any others. Because ironically, one of the things, as you know, Richard, going through the Master's League, is that we teach a multitude of habits and opportunities to build habits based off of what is so-called our proactive time and what is our support time. So that could fall into the billable, non-billable aspect is what you're talking about. Yet I agree with you, if you're not fully prepared and organized and you show up, your mind is not fully prepared and organized, right? So again, like what it says in here, the training courses are not billable. Yet, if you don't do them, then you don't actually get to experience the same level of expertise you show up with, right?
Yeah, I would say that the training and professional education, continuing education is part of your hourly rate. It's not a separately billable item. But if you scroll back up a little bit on that, where it talks about what's not billable, proposals for new work, proposals might be billable depending on the circumstances.
And you
Or
see the
pitching new
difference.
work might be billable depending upon, who you're pitching to and what's required to make that pitch, as it were. So.
Well, and here's an example as a consultant. Let's say I hire a accounting consultant and they're doing certain things. Their billable and my billable may be completely different, right? So again, it's all about that differences of perception. So even like networking example is showed as one of those non-billable events. Depending on how you buy into your framework of being in front of people, that is considered a proactive event in my book. And that is a commitment of building relationships, which is advocate building, which is the opportunity to build the next opportunity to fulfill a need, right? So I completely agree with you in all the different perspectives. Drop down to the next one, Haley. And it goes into how I can track it. And this was an example of, and I want to go here just in regards to, this is an example of invoicing, time logs, understanding. I loved how it says, and I don't know how many people in this room have only worked 2,080 hours. But anyways, I joked about that one earlier. Yet when I do ask each of you to work on time logs so you can see what's happening in your day. And actually one of my clients resisted me for the longest time to start building some time scheduling and categorize it. So a certain color had health, a certain color had personal.
So I'm just going to say the second to the last sentence there, I want to really draw everybody's attention to it. Once you have that hourly rate, which is essentially what they're saying is how much money do you want to make, you may wish to raise it slightly to offset the amount of time you'll spend working on non-billable tasks like administrative work and client pitches. You got to include that for sure. And it may not be slightly, it might be a significant increase, because if you look at time spent, I don't know, Sam, what your experience is, but it seems to me that at least a third of my time is spent on non-client work per se.
And Sam, it looks like you wanted to add something before I dive into the next part.
I think that is definitely true. That was just something that I was baking into the flat fee anyway. So I would say, well, it's going to take me approximately this many hours. And like Richard was saying about the risk, so I might tack on an hour just in case, although usually I would be okay. In addition to all the administrative stuff. So I think that, I think that either way you bill it, I think that you definitely have to bake in all that other stuff. Otherwise I think you're missing out on a lot.
Well,
April, there's a very specific thing in law that I've seen in other practices and domains that's applicable here. So if you farm out legal work, traditionally what happens is 1/3 goes to the person who's doing the work, 1/3 goes to cover office expense, and 1/3 goes to the person who procured the work and is managing that. So that gives you kind of an idea that the actual work is not the bulk of the hourly rate. It's usually a little bit less than that. So again, that's just a sort of a standard that happens in law with a third, a third, and a third. And it's not carved in stone, but it is a reasonably reliable guideline.
And there was the same in many other industries of who found the business and who served the business, and then who ultimately was the holder of all that, right? Yeah. And so I agree with you, and I love the breakdown that you just gave. Yet, do you see how heavily weighted and sensitive and triggered this billable hours word and phrase is? And yet, when I brought it up for the health perspective, Richard, that's the trigger is the result of feeling better and being healthy and being committed to that process. And you have no problems putting committed hours into that. Mm-hmm. And they are connected to the energy, the results, the joy. And that's what I talk about in the video this morning, is that when we measure, so that time log concept, the so-called keeping your billable hours, the hours you commit to walking, the hours you commit to what you choose to invest in for your health, vitamins, food, water, etc. All of that is a commitment of billable time of your life. Does that make sense? You're not so-called billing it, but hypothetically, Richard, you know what it looks like when you're not doing that. And what happens if you're not committing to that, you pay the price as well. And there is a cost. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, another way of looking at it is we each get only so many hours, right? Whether they're quote unquote billable or not, it's what your life is. So how do you want to spend your hours?
Exactly. How do you want to invest them or how do you want to waste them? And we get to choose, right? So again, there's a tool, and Haley, you can go and bring that down. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, sure. You want me to stop share?
Is there anything else? Anybody has any questions on any of the, yes, please. Thank you. Anything that you want to comment on it, or you want to open it up for open question?
Open questions.
Oh, and say again, Richard.
Open questions for me anyway.
You're ready. Sam, you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, I really didn't know that we were talking about this today, but you can probably tell that I've done a lot about billable hours, having built a company around that. So anyway, yeah.
well, and Richard, to wrap up, two things I was saying, and I want to make sure I finish up the thought. First of all, Sam, I want to go back to what you said about understanding sometimes it's not so much the cost that you have, it's the benefit that the client's going to get. So example of that marketing aspect, Sam, getting somebody to be able to know that they have that support and know they can pay somebody to handle it and it gets off their plate has a lot of value to them if you can show them and take out the risk that Richard's talking about and confirm that there's very little risk and you have a way of guaranteeing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, with the marketing projects, the goal is obviously to sign them up on a month-to-month basis, so they're paying a recurring fee every month for a certain amount. But if they went on Upwork or Fiverr or whatever the case may be, they could find contractors that they would be paying literally pennies on a dollar to what they'd be paying me. But there's no guarantee of that about that investment. If they really want to, if they're dead set on paying someone on an hourly rate or really granular basis, they can do that. But if they're more interested on, well, what is going to be the best for the business, if they want to look at it as an investment, then that's where I step in. So.
Well, and thank you, Sam. And so I'm going to go back and finish up on the concept of all the different aspects of hours. As I was mentioning, a young lady, she finally decided to create a schedule that had percentages attached to each time. And she would track all the time, et cetera. It took me forever for her to get her to buy into that. But once she bought in, she recognized the freedom it gave her and the satisfaction and fulfillment it gave her to see that she was getting the value of the commitment of time. And she would see it and actually tangibly be able to see the percentages increase and decide where she wanted to decrease because she was paying attention and be able to see the numbers and the colors in association with that. So anyone listening, I think that is a very valuable concept to contemplate. And we work on the same things in our color codings, et cetera, with that. So opening it up to questions. I think, first of all, thank you both for all of you to bringing a multitude of perspectives to a concept that when our coach asked us the same question, and I've asked multiple people as well, we had to ask ourselves, okay, how purposeful are we being in some of these perspectives? And making sure, I mean, after 10 plus years of doing this, you'd think I'd have every detail figured out. Welcome to the club. We're all still figuring it out, right? So, and we grow from each other. So we're very thankful for the different perspectives. So which question would you like to put out, or do you want me to put the question out?
Why don't you put out a question?
You like it when I questions come out of nowhere. So Richard, and I'll actually open it up to the whole group as the decision of the question. And Sam, is there any questions you had before I
Nope, I don't.
You're like totally open to that, right? Okay. So my curious question for today, now, when we talk about perceptions and we move into living in the driver's seat is a membership tool we're working on. And I asked you immediately, what does billable hours mean to you? So I'm going to ask you then, perception, what does living in the driver's seat mean to you? Don't everybody jump at once.
Well, I think, April, what you're describing is there's a difference between what's probably objectively said as money-making activities within a business and and other time. So for example, I could spend 24 hours a day researching estate law stuff, or as an attorney, or marketing stuff as, you know, a marketing company, but that's not moving the business further. Now that's technically work, you know, just like I could be reading emails all day from people. That's technically work, but that's not moving the business any further or getting me any closer to the goals. I think as an aside, when you say billable hours, I think you might have pitchforks and torches and, you know, all that kind of stuff from attorneys when you get them together to talk about it.
I
But I think billable hours versus the driver's seat. The driver's seat is definitely saying what's going to get the business forward, and being in control. Rather, billable hours, I could, you know, research something for a client, and that might get me to my hour, whether or not that's going to get them any further or not. So
Sam, if I heard you correctly, living in the driver's seat to you means, how am I moving forward? How am I making sure that I'm making some distance? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I would say for me, the way I would express that is living in the driver's seat is not being at the effect of what's happening in the world, but actually being the person choosing what we're doing. And that gives a tremendous amount of freedom in terms of how you spend your time and how you spend your life, you know. And the essence of that, I think, is knowledge. It's information. I mean, over the weekend on one of my walks, I was thinking about, you know, well, I do estate planning, I do bankruptcy, and I do tax resolution. Those are my three practice areas. And people ask me, so they find out my attorney, what do you do? Well, I find it hard to answer that question because I don't do those things. Those are just tools in my, it's an arrow in my quiver to achieve a result. What I do is analyze your situation and help you figure out what do you need to do to get the result or the objective that you desire. And that's what I said, that in terms of billable hours, that's where you get into a little bit of a conundrum, because the real value that you're providing, and maybe it's partly because of where I am in my career, it's like, okay, I think about 4 million different things about what their situation is and how to get them from here to there. So I think driver's seat is being able to choose what you're doing that way and being informed about it.
I love that. Haley?
Yeah, I see it, you know, like active versus passive. If you're in the driver's seat, it's an active stance. You're not at the whim of whatever happens to you. You're in control of the situation. So as it applies to billable hours, you know, instead of looking like it, let's say you do kind of map out your day, your week, and you say, wow, you know, I really have to be spending a lot of time on these non-billable things or things that are not moving the business forward, just as nature of what we do. Like that's just part of it. But instead, you could be in the driver's seat, be in the more active stance, and go find somebody to delegate those administrative tasks to. So therefore, you could spend more time on the billable, you know, moving the business forward things. So, you know, you're not being affected necessarily by what might be true, but you're taking a different stance and you're kind of tackling it, you know, so that it works out in your favor. That's what I think of.
Anyone else want to add anything more before I add a little bit more definition? And one last question before we send you on your way to your day.
I think billable hours, I think, probably has a negative connotation with a lot of people that makes this particular conversation a little bit more difficult.
And Sam, I love your candidness with that, because we had no idea the depth of reaction when we were talking about it, because in our perspectives, it didn't have the pitchforks attached to it.
At all. Yeah.
And yet the fun part about everything in our world is everybody's got perception, right? And Richard, you've read the book that I talk about, Building Bridges, right? Yeah. And you know what we just found out is that we got on a bridge that had a whole lot more heat than we had realized, right? And then so when we brought it into, okay, so we would have said we're living in the driver's seat this week, and we would have had a conversation about what does it mean to be proactively in the driver's seat. It wouldn't have had the same reaction that we got today. Yeah. Isn't that exciting? Yeah. And yet challenging. because, and as that bridge builder that loves, go offend somebody on accident, because I had no idea, right? And I do it regularly, by the way. And I work on it. I mean, it was so funny. I think I've shared a story when I was at the football game. I don't know how many people have heard this story. So I'm at the Titans and the 49ers game in Tennessee. And so I felt bad because I'm a 49ers fan in Titans gear. And so I'm attempting to be in this community. So we go to the place afterwards. And ironically, it's called The Lucky Bastard. And I'm writing a story about it to go in the newsletter. And I walk up to the gentleman at the bar, and he's got this big old necklace because my friend asked me to. He's got a big old necklace with a 49er logo on it. And I just said, could you do me a favor? As I walk up to him, and he looks at me like, who are you? What do you want? And why are you here? My point being is that had I approached him like, hey, I love your necklace, then I probably would have said, and I'm a 49ers fan, I would have approached him a whole lot differently with a different perspective. And Sam, that's basically what you just said. By the way, I've got a fun Facebook photo with the 49ers logo shirt on me, but
well, I think that is exactly the thing. I think that if you were doing this sort of presentation for like a local bar association or something like that, I think that you'd end up spending 2 hours on why everybody hates billable hours,
right?
rather than what you want to talk about. So
let's end on a fun question about approach. Moving forward, as we move into our Q&As and our group fulfillment of how we're fulfilling our 2022 commitments, how are we living in that driver's seat, and how will we support you in this process to be purposeful in phrases that create joy and buy-in and keep us moving forward? Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I actually wanted to share what I consider the takeaway that anybody who listens to this, I'd like to have them take with them. And that is, it is, as I say, a balancing act. If you bill by the hour, the risk is absorbed by the client. If you bill by the flat fee, the risk is absorbed by the provider of the service. And the art form here is to find out where is the safe spot for both parties that they can both agree to, so that the risk is minimal on both sides and both parties are happy. If you think about it in terms of weighing and balancing the risk, I think you'll go a long way towards having a good hourly billing relationship or flat fee billing relationship.
And how would you apply that into the personal side, like your health journey and your commitments of hours and investments and your commitment of not, or risk of not?
Pretty similarly, actually.
Right, yeah.
There's a risk. If you don't take care of your health, obviously your health could deteriorate. You could die earlier rather than later. There's all kinds of things that could happen. On the other hand, if you spend 20 hours a day worrying about your health, well, you're not getting anything done. So it's the same balance that needs to be achieved there in terms of allocation of effort. And it isn't just about health. There are, I think I shared with you just yesterday about the domains that I look at. And besides health, you've got, sociability and membership and the world and all sorts of things to think about. And so where do you put your time in each of those domains, and which ones are most important to you? And so it's about finding, being true to yourself and finding out what actually works for you in terms of spending that time. And,
well, and Richard,
hours.
And say that last sentence again.
And that's just an extension of billable hours.
And here's the exciting thing, Richard, when you say, what do I do? You are the consultant that determines how am I filtering how best we may serve you and where you're headed next. So that is the only answer you need to give from here on out, right?
Yes.
So my expertise of billable hours is getting to reframe everybody's mindset and thought patterns. Yet, Sam, anything you want to add and wrap us up with?
I think that's it. It's good.
That you're ecstatic with that.
Yeah, I mean, we could push this longer about billable hours, but I don't think that.
We're like, we'll leave that one alone. Haley, any wrap up item?
No.
Well, you are all a gift. We thank you for joining us. I do believe our recording will have some great weight with our audience, and we thank you for being here live. We appreciate the opportunity to invest. And next week, we'll be diving deeper into the driver's seat and the awareness of what it means to be purposeful about being on purpose, if that makes sense. We have all kinds of fun stuff lined up for the year.
Hey, Sam, nice meeting you, and
Nice meeting you.
great seeing you again.
Yes, good to see you.
Great to see you all. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Good to hear. Bye-bye.
Bye.